The galactic concord had seen thousands of species rise and fall. They had witnessed civilizations mastering the forces of gravity, bending time to their will, even merging consciousness with artificial intelligence. But never, in the long history of recorded spacefaring species, had they encountered anything quite like humans. At first glance, humans seemed unremarkable. Bipedal, carbon-based, limited in physical prowess compared to the Juggarath or the Azurkai, who could crush steel with their bare hands or endure the vacuum of space without suits. They lacked the hive-mind efficiency of the Scalari or the natural electromagnetic field manipulations of the Varine. And yet, there was something about them that unsettled even the most dominant species in the galaxy. It wasn't their technology. Most of their advancements had been either borrowed or adapted from other species. It wasn't their biology either. Fragile, prone to disease, limited in lifespan. No, what disturbed the great empires of the stars was something far more subtle, something buried deep in their psychology. It all started with a simple observation, one that many species ignored at first. In every diplomatic meeting, every interstellar negotiation, every gathering where multiple species convened, the humans had an unshakable habit. No matter the situation, no matter the environment, they always chose to sit at the back. At first, this was chalked up to simple cultural differences. Perhaps humans had a preference for distance, an aversion to the spotlight. Some assumed it was a survival instinct, that they felt safer with their backs to a wall and a full view of the room. But as time went on, an unsettling pattern emerged. No matter where the meeting was held, whether in a neutral space station, aboard a warship, or in the great halls of the Senate, the humans never took the seats at the front. Even when invited, even when encouraged, they simply smiled and declined. The first species to take serious note of this behavior were the Zerlan, a warlike reptilian species known for their tactical genius and brutal efficiency in battle. Their leader, General Koresh, had always prided himself on his ability to read his enemies before a single shot was fired. He had studied the humans extensively, expecting to find weaknesses. But instead, what he found disturbed him. Humans were the only species that seemed to understand something the others didn't. They weren't avoiding attention. They weren't acting out of fear. They were watching, studying, waiting. Koresh's suspicions were confirmed when a minor skirmish broke out between the Zerlan and the Othari, a species of insectoid warriors who had recently entered the galactic stage. The battle had been predictable. Clashes in deep space, the exchange of fire, strategic withdrawals. But what unnerved the general was the human fleet stationed nearby. The humans had no stake in the battle, no alliances binding them to either side. They could have intervened. They didn't. They merely observed. For weeks, their ships remained on the outskirts, recording every maneuver, every tactic, every strength and flaw displayed by both sides. When the dust settled and the Zerlan secured victory, Koresh found himself with an uneasy thought. If the roles were reversed, if humans had been the ones engaged in battle, they would have known every detail of their opponent before even firing. A shot. The humans weren't passive. They weren't timid. They were patient. Word spread quickly among the galactic elite. The Scalari diplomats whispered among themselves, revisiting every negotiation they had ever conducted with humans, suddenly questioning if they had ever truly been in control. The Juggarath, who had once laughed at the physical weakness of humans, grew uneasy as reports emerged of human soldiers enduring injuries that would have rendered most species useless. They realized that pain tolerance in humans was not just a matter of survival, but a tool they wielded with terrifying precision. Then came the incident aboard the Grand Council station. It was supposed to be a simple security drill, a routine exercise to test the station's response to threats. But when the alarm blared and simulated chaos broke out, something strange happened. The humans, who had been scattered throughout the station, didn't panic. They didn't freeze, didn't ask for guidance. Instead, they moved. With eerie synchronicity, they relocated to positions that gave them the best vantage points, cutting off strategic choke points, controlling sightlines. They didn't rush to the escape pods like the diplomats, or scramble for weapons like the warriors. They positioned themselves in ways that suggested they had already anticipated the worst-case scenario before the alarm had even sounded. That was the moment the galaxy began to understand. Humans sat at the back not out of fear, but out of instinct. A deeply ingrained, carefully honed instinct that had been shaped by centuries of conflict, survival, and adaptability. When they entered a room, they assessed it within seconds. Entry points, exit routes, potential threats. They saw what others missed. They waited where others rushed. For the first time, the most powerful species in the galaxy began to feel something they had never associated with humanity before: fear. The realization spread like wildfire across the galactic community. What had once been dismissed as a mere cultural quirk now seemed like a calculated strategy, a remnant of a survival instinct honed over millennia of war, betrayal, and adversity. The more they analyzed human behavior, the more they saw it. An underlying pattern that set them apart from every other species in existence. It wasn't just their tendency to sit at the back. It was how they moved, how they spoke, how they reacted to uncertainty. The Varine scholars, known for their extensive research into psychological warfare, began studying human interactions in depth. They examined recordings of negotiations, military briefings, even casual conversations, and they found something deeply unsettling. Unlike most species, humans didn't always seek control of a situation by dominating it. Instead, they positioned themselves just outside the center of attention, where they could watch and listen without being the focus. They were the only species that could blend in without truly being unnoticed. It was as if they had mastered the art of being both present and invisible at the same time. Diplomatic encounters were reassessed with a new perspective. The Scholari, once proud of their ability to manipulate negotiations, suddenly felt as though they had been playing into human hands all along. Every concession, every compromise they had believed to be on their terms, now seemed like it had been subtly guided by human influence. The humans never pushed too hard, never demanded too much. They let others feel like they were leading while quietly steering them toward the outcomes they preferred. But the true test came in an event that would shake the foundations of the Concord itself. It started with a minor trade dispute between the Trelthari and the Ymir Dominion, two long-standing rivals whose skirmishes rarely escalated beyond economic sanctions and border disputes. However, this time was different. A miscalculated embargo led to an act of retaliation, and within weeks, tensions erupted into full-scale war. The Concord, desperate to prevent an all-out collapse of interstellar peace, convened an emergency summit to mediate. Every major species sent their most skilled negotiators, each determined to sway the talks in their favor. The humans, true to form, remained on the sidelines, sitting quietly in the back, listening. Days turned into weeks as the negotiations stalled. Accusations were hurled, threats exchanged. The Trelthari demanded reparations. The Ymir insisted on total military withdrawal. The gathered leaders grew restless, and even the seasoned diplomats began to lose hope. The situation was at an impasse. Then, without warning, the human envoy finally spoke. The room fell silent, not because of what was said, but because of how it was said. There was no grand speech, no forceful argument. Instead, the human envoy simply pointed out the obvious: the weaknesses in each side's position, the inconsistencies in their demands, the risks neither had fully considered. In a matter of minutes, the entire framework of the negotiations was reshaped, not by force, but by the quiet, methodical dismantling of flawed logic. The effect was immediate. The Trelthari, realizing they had underestimated the consequences of their embargo, softened their stance. The Ymir, faced with the reality of prolonged conflict, reconsidered their aggressive posturing. Within hours, a peace agreement was drafted. The crisis was averted, and when the exhausted diplomats looked back on how it had happened, they saw the pattern again. Humans had waited, studied, analyzed, and when the time was right, they had spoken with precision. In the aftermath, the galaxy's leaders met in secret. The question was no longer about why humans sat at the back. The question was what else they had been watching, what else they had been preparing for. The realization was chilling. If humans applied this level of patience and strategy to diplomacy, what would it mean in war? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. The war came without warning. The Krasir Dominion, a brutal empire that had long remained on the fringes of the galactic stage, launched a full-scale invasion against the conquered. unlike the skirmishes and border disputes of the past. This was total war, calculated, merciless, and executed with terrifying precision. The Crozier had spent centuries building their forces in secret, waiting for the moment when the major species were divided, weakened by political games and complacency. They struck hard and fast, tearing through planetary defenses, overwhelming fleets with numbers, and crushing opposition before it had a chance to organize. The conquered was in chaos. Species that had never known war on this scale scrambled to mount a response, but they were unprepared. The Scalari, masters of diplomacy but weak in direct combat, were among the first to fall. The Juggarath, despite their strength, found their brute force tactics ineffective against an enemy that relied on speed and adaptability. The Varine, known for their intelligence, had miscalculated the threat and now faced extinction. Planets burned, alliances crumbled, and the once mighty conquered stood on the brink of collapse. And yet, in the darkest hour, when all seemed lost, the humans did what they had always done. They watched, they analyzed, they waited. For weeks they had remained on the sidelines, their fleets holding formation just outside the war zones. The other species saw this as hesitation, weakness, a refusal to act. But those who had studied humanity closely knew better. Humans never acted until they understood the enemy completely. They were collecting data, observing the Croziers' attack patterns, fleet movements, supply lines. While the conquered struggled in desperation, the humans were assembling a complete picture of their enemy. Then, when the moment was right, they struck. It was not a grand, heroic counteroffensive. There were no declarations of war, no announcements of retaliation. The humans simply moved with terrifying efficiency. Within days, entire Crozier supply lines vanished. Key warships were ambushed and destroyed before they even knew they were being targeted. Communication hubs, hidden bases, and strategic outposts were wiped out with surgical precision. The Crozier, once unstoppable, suddenly found themselves confused, disoriented. It was as if the humans had already fought this war in their minds before it had even begun. And in a way, they had. Human history was filled with war. Unlike the conquered species, who had experienced periods of peace spanning millennia, humanity had never known true stability. Their history was one of conflict, betrayal, and adaptation. They had fought wars across deserts, mountains, oceans, and the vacuum of space. They had mastered unconventional warfare, deception, psychological manipulation. While the Crozier relied on brute force, humans fought with strategy, patience, and ruthlessness. They did not fight for honor or glory, they fought to win. The war turned swiftly. The conquered species, once demoralized, found themselves swept into the human-led counterattack. It was not just their superior tactics that shifted the tide, it was their ability to inspire. Humanity had always understood war in a way the others had not. They understood that victory was not just about firepower, but about breaking the enemy's will. And the Crozier, for the first time in their empire's history, felt fear. The final battle was over before it even truly began. The humans had predicted the Crozier's last desperate stand and countered it before they had a chance to react. By the time the enemy realized what was happening, they were surrounded. Their leaders, once so confident in their supremacy, now begged for surrender. Humanity, in their characteristic way, did not revel in victory. They did not boast or celebrate. They simply ended the war and moved on, already thinking several steps ahead. In the aftermath, the surviving species of the Concorde gathered once more. This time, there was no debate, no questioning. They all understood now. The humans had never been weak. They had never been afraid. They had simply been waiting. And so, from that moment forward, whenever a new species encountered humanity for the first time, they would notice the same thing. No matter where they went, no matter the setting, the humans always sat at the back, watching, waiting, preparing, and the galaxy finally understood why. Please subscribe this channel for more interesting videos like this.